Okay,
Okay.
we are live. Welcome, guys. This is Critical Minds podcast. So today is going to be our second episode. We have our guest here, Rob. Rob, I want to double check. How do you say your last name again?
Paw. It
Rob.
sounds, yeah, it sounds just like an animal's foot, but it's spelled differently. So, like, it looks like you'd say Paugh or something, but that's how it's pronounced, paw.
It sounds fancy. That's all I can say. Well, Robert is we appreciate him like for coming to our like first official like podcast uh
Cool.
episode. Yep, thank you, man. And now we have Braden. Say a few words, Braden. What's up, man?
How's it going? Yeah, Rob was my assistant professor, or not uh, assistant professor, yeah, assistant professor in the biology department at Brock University. Very helpful person, always helped me with my labs, always helped me when I needed questions. So we're bringing him on here. I mean, he can introduce himself and his qualifications, but he does have a master's in biology. So I think that's pretty cool, and we're going to be picking his brain on a bunch of questions. And so, Rob, if you want to introduce yourself, go for it.
Sure. So, my undergraduate degree that I did at Brock was in biochemistry. I did the 4-year honors thesis option, which is you have to do a project. So my project was organic chemistry. Um, and so I studied chemical reactions of like a specific functional group. Uh, I went to Guelph afterwards to do a master's in biochemistry and chemistry. That's the name of the degree. And so I did my research there was synthesizing a potentially deadly metabolite produced by fungi that aspergillus that lives in like grains stored like coffee beans. Um, then after that, I went to Brock. I TA'd for a while and did an undergraduate degree in psychology, and that's pretty much it.
Sweet, sweet.
Oh, all right.
Okay, yeah. So it sounds quite complex.
It- it's really dry for some people,
Okay.
and so yeah, it it's like learning a new language, organic chemistry at least. It's you have to understand how basically the negative charged parts of an atom will interact with another one based on what atoms are connected together.
Cool, cool.
Hopefully that
Okay.
makes sense.
That sounds like interesting. That's all I can say.
Okay.
So because we're like you're coming from a whole different like field. Obviously it's related to like more Braden. For me, like you're like a whole new mind. So like you're like a library. So honestly, like yeah, that's pretty awesome. Um, and I'd
You want
say
to get
like
into the? Oh, go ahead, Sal. Sorry. Go
no,
ahead.
it's okay. It's okay. So I think like I mean, first of all, I hope you had a good day, that I know too. We had like in the beginning of our podcast, guys, we had like 45 minutes almost trying to figure out like some minor issue, but
Yeah,
now we're
we
good.
got
Now
it.
we're good.
We fixed it.
Yeah, now we can hop into the pod. Braden, you wanna jump right into it?
Yeah, let's get into the first question for Rob here. Um, so the first question, which I think you'll like this quite a bit, Rob, is the scientific method based on priors, hypothesis testing, and revision? That's pretty much how the scientific method works. Not completely logically sound? If so, could it be inherently biased in ways we haven't even recognized yet? In other words, are there truths the scientific method is structurally incapable of discovering?
So the way the scientific method works is you not you personally, right? You design an experiment based on a question that you want to answer. So it's basically a yes or a no, that it has to have those outcomes in the experiment. For example, if I drop a ball that weighs 20 pounds and a little pebble that weighs 2 grams at the same time, will they accelerate at the same rate as they fall down, say from 100 feet in the air, or will they not? Right? And so turns out they do, right? Um, in terms of any inherent um, anything that we aren't aware of that can affect the scientific process, right? The scientific principles there behind a testable hypothesis. There is, I know there's bias. There is a lot of bias. The idea is the person tries to prove whatever question they're trying to answer. They try their best to prove it wrong. That's what you're supposed to follow. Um, when it could you elaborate more on unknowns, right? Things that we don't know, just briefly, just so I can.
Well, yeah, the angle I'm kind of getting at this with is that when you make an appropriate decision or when you make a rational decision, you're kind of taking prior information. You're kind of using the scientific method. You're taking priors and then you're applying those priors to the present situation. Like if I
Okay.
see 1,000 red houses, what's the chance that I'm going to see another red house? It's probably pretty high. So
Okay.
I guess what I'm kind of getting at is what do you do when you don't have the priors or you don't have, um, information previous? How do you make a rational decision at that point? How do you use the scientific method to
Okay.
make a well-informed decision? Does that kind of make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
The red houses, you're talking about probability, right?
Yes.
But
Yes.
I understand what
Yes.
you mean. So when we do an experiment, we can the one important feature of an experiment is it infers causality. So we know that one variable causes something else we're measuring to change. Uh, for example, just say we have a plant, right? And we're watering, let's say, okay, I wonder how well it will grow. We're not changing anything else, right? We're just adding water. And so, say for 1 week, we give it maybe half a cup of water a day, right? And then we measure the growth. And then week 2, we double that. And then we triple it. And then we quadruple it, right? And if you see a relationship, right, then we know the only thing we changed was the water,
So
right?
you isolate the variables in some sense.
How it works is you're only changing one thing. And there can be complications with that, but the idea is you're only changing one thing at a time. And that way you know how well it's influencing the dependent variable. The independent, of course, is the thing that we're controlling. So how much water for the plant. The dependent is how much is the plant growing, right? And so when I mentioned earlier about testing how wrong, like trying to test ourselves, prove ourselves wrong, you know, uh, we would say put the plant in the same conditions, say on the other side of the earth, right? Or in the North Pole, right? Um, or even the same conditions. Well, no, it can have the same conditions in outer space. But I think you get where I'm coming from. So
Yeah.
we want to
Yeah.
make sure that it's just the water, right? And so there are limitations to causality. right? So if we have a growth curve for plants where we only test 0 water for the first week, which of those plants would probably die, right? But anyways, we're say we start with the quarter of a cup of water and then the half a cup and then 1 cup and then 2 cups of water a day, right? And that's where we stop. We can only say that this relationship exists, this causality, right, of water affecting growth only exists from the quarter of a cup to where we stop the 2 cups, right? We don't know what will happen after the 2 cups, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Because you
we
haven't measured that, is that why?
because we have measured it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It could
Yeah.
be a straight, it could be a linear relationship, just a straight line from the half of the quarter of the cup to 2 cups, right? And then all of a sudden it could taper off. It could like not matter anymore after a while. So that's just a straightforward example, hopefully straightforward enough that I could think of. If we don't know, if we don't have a body of knowledge, right, produced by the scientific method to move forward with from for a question that we want to answer, we can start from first principles, right? And it depends on the question you want to answer. And so what I mean by start from first principles is things that we already know, right? So for one, we exist, right? It depends on the nature of the question. Two, we need air to live, oxygen, right?
Mm.
Three, there is a sun in our solar system that the planets revolve around, right? Four, we ourselves divide so we can live, right? So there are some things that can help act as a leaping board for you to answer a question, but it depends. It really, really depends on the question that you want to answer. So, was there a particular question area, general area that you're curious about that you would want to possibly try and answer? Is my question.
Can I interject?
Good,
Of
go for it.
course.
Thank you guys. So I would say, so Rob, like how can someone like that is like an average person understand the ideology? Like how would you explain it to someone that is in the fourth grade, for example?
The scientific method.
No, the process of elimination when it comes down to adding one thing at a time. How can like
Okay.
how can we make it simple so normal people can use it?
Oh, okay. So let's see. I could use the example of a garden, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, if that's
That work?
simple and if you think it's simple enough that like someone that, like the average person would be able to understand, because obviously like you have a lot of knowledge.
Okay. Let me try and think of an applicable example that could be useful, but is more understand. Yeah, that's my puppy. Okay, let's see. All right.
Like
So,
maybe Rob, to make this interesting, let's just say you're going on a date with a girl, a nice lady, and you want to gauge if she's interested in you. Like if she views you as uh I guess this is kind of a practical example because I think everyone dates and you want to gauge if she's interested in you. You want to gauge if she likes you, if she finds you appealing, whatever. What would be the best way of doing that? Is there a best way of doing it from like a
oh,
scientific method perspective?
so when we're talking about people, there is a lot there are a lot of layers to that because there are individual differences. For example, if you go on the exact same date, if you could possibly reproduce, so our independent variable here, right, is the date. It's the restaurant, it's what we eat, it's how we conduct ourselves. It would be like, say you could hypothetically speaking, you could just use the same script, have the same conversations, right? Different people will respond and behave differently. So that would be a hard one to do,
Yeah.
So making
right?
a car, how about that? If we're making a car,
Making a car.
since
Okay,
it's more
what
of an
give
object.
me an idea of like what kind of question we might want to answer.
So let's say if we want to find out if if we can make a better car, um, in that situation, would we isolate each different type of suspension, each different type of car frame, each different type of brakes, like brand, and
Okay,
then like we go from there?
let's go with suspensions, right? And just say there is something we can measure, right? Let's say we can measure their springiness, so their tensile strength, right? So that is a number that you can probably get from a manufacturer, right?
Mhm.
And so it could be for someone's car. So say the smaller the number, the less the tensile strength, right? And what we're going to measure then is how long the car lasts before you have to change the suspension, basically, right?
Mhm.
So the idea there is, well, if we want to go, we'll test 10, right? And then maybe 20, 50, 100 in terms of tensile strength, right? Just going up. Uh, we could have the same person, right? Start with the 10 and then the same person, same driving habits. You're eliminating a lot of unknown variables out there. They're referred to as extraneous variables. So different people might drive differently, right? So stick with the same person. Say they're only using it to get to the same workplace and back, so they're typically driving to the same roads, and then in their spare time they do the same things, right? And we'll go by number of days of how long it takes for the suspension to crap out, right? And so tensile strength 10, oh, they crapped out after 30 days, right? 20, 40 days, 50, maybe 80 days or 90 days. And then so the higher you go up, right? The better, like the longer the car lasts before it craps out. And then you can repeat that. That's the idea. That strengthens the data. And what I mean by that is it makes it more reliable. If you can repeat an experiment and get similar values over and over and over, then makes those that makes that trend that you're seeing between the independent variable, so the thing that we can control, which is say the tensile strength, springiness, right, of the suspension, versus how long the car will last, right? Because nobody likes to spend hundreds of dollars on getting a new suspension, right? Uh, if you can repeat that over and over again, those results will be referred to as robust, right? So they're not malleable, they're not wishy-washy. They are sturdy, like they are reliable, they are robust, they
Mhm.
are very strong, resistant to whatever outside variables, right?
Okay.
Would you
Yeah.
say would you say that the theory of evolution is very much that way? Like very robust, very falsifiable, very for those of you that don't know what falsifiable means in science, it means something that can be proven wrong. We covered that in the first podcast, but would you say kind of evolution is on that wavelength, if you will?
So I've heard a lot of arguments about it where people say, "Oh, it's just a theory," right? Um, and sorry to just go on a little tangent here. And
No
I
worries, go for it.
I like to think I'm
Go
not
for it.
biased, right? I try my best to not be biased. And by not being biased, what I mean is you don't want to get involved emotionally in some sort of debate, or I won't say argument because some people think that means yelling and screaming, right? But actually, a discussion, an argument is like someone's making an argument, they're making a point, right? The
Mhm.
idea is to turn off your emotions and open your mind and actually consider what the other person is saying, right? And how true it is, right?
Yeah.
Um, so some people say, oh, it's just a theory. Well, there are a lot of theories out there. So if someone says it's equivalent to saying, oh, well, that's just a dog, right? Well, there are a lot of different kinds of dogs, right? So that's just a theory. There are a lot of different kinds of theories. Some of them have tons and tons and tons of research poured into them, right? So some are really, really, they're supported by really, really strong foundations of evidence. So they're very robust relationships, right?
Yeah.
Compared to other theories. Like somebody could just pull a theory out of their ass, a new theory, right? And it could be testable. That's a theory, right? So yeah, sorry about that. Um, with evolution, there are some things that we can actually do experiments for, and obviously there are some things that we can only look at the correlation. Correlation, so just say I'm trying to lose weight. The more I exercise, right? Well, you look at many different people, but anyways, I could look back in time and say, hey, the more I was exercising, the more I was losing weight, right? That doesn't mean that because I was exercising, I was losing weight. They just correlate together. There isn't necessarily causation there versus an experiment where you control the independent variable and nothing, you only change that and nothing else, right? And then you measure the dependent variable. So how much weight did I lose, for example? Um, so there are some things with the theory of evolution that we can't test using the scientific method. We have to rely on correlations.
Yeah, and just kind of go off like because you could still like train, but if you eat like too much, you're still gonna get like you can gain weight even not necessarily like but it's just there's tendencies to everything, but like you said, the causation doesn't equal correlation doesn't equal causation most of the time.
Exactly. Another common example, the the more sunny outside it is, right? Sorry. The more ice cream that people buy from cones from outside vendors, the more shark attacks there are, right? So eating ice cream
That's
cones
funny.
doesn't cause shark attacks, right? There is something else going on. Those two are correlated, right? Um, but really there's an outside variable going on. Probably it's really nice out. So people go to the beach and they have ice cream and they go and splash around in the water. And obviously that this is just an example, right? Like I'm just its utility is just as an example. I'm sure there are a lot of things that people could argue about, like, well, it depends on where you are in the world or whatever, this and that, and they're
Yeah,
correct.
yeah,
But just as an example, that isn't there's correlation for you, right?
yeah,
Some things are correlated that do seem that are way more related to one another than ice cream and shark attacks, though.
yeah,
For example, exercising and losing weight, right?
exactly.
Um, so yeah, so hopefully that answers the question.
All right,
Long.
let's move on to the Sal. You want to ask your first question?
I can, yeah, but did you finish your second or third or not yet?
Well, we're just gonna do it. You ask a question, I ask a question. Is that cool?
Okay, cool. Yeah, yeah. So,
Yeah.
My question really is literally wrote them down to make sure, I'm asking you the right question. So, yeah, so my first question is how does biology relate to ancient civilizations, especially since we have civilizations like ancient Egypt and hidden sciences that are not well known up to this day?
Okay, so how does biology relate to really old civilizations?
Yes, so like essentially like we grew up like thinking that, we only had a specific type of medicine and like there was only one specific way that we all came to be, with evolution and civilization.
Okay,
But then as we go back and we see like for example, nowadays like there's only like the Western civilization being talked about regarding like medicine, things along these lines. But if we're looking at like, more ancient civilizations, like they have different types of medicines that we don't even know, like obviously like not everything, because we know about like 50 to 80% about what they know. But there's certain things out there that we don't know like 100% like how that came to be. So is there a specific way that basically helps like is like that biology has a evidence of like how that was possible, like or if there was some kind of bacteria or some kind of organism at the time that helped them um, develop certain things in their times that we are not even capable of understanding, like the hidden medicines and the hidden remedies and the hidden mummification rituals, things along these lines.
okay. So the things that weren't documented, we don't know. We'll never know.
Mhm.
Um, when it comes to, let's see. So when it comes to medicine as a whole, I don't I don't subscribe to the whole Western medicine, new medicine, Eastern medicine. The idea is, does it work or not? If it works, it's medicine. If it doesn't, it's a placebo or it's some sort of fraud, right? In this day and age. For example, healing stones, right? And no offense to anyone that believes this, just following the scientific method, do these work or not? Well, no, they don't. And I believe I obviously I haven't read all of the journals or whatnot on what's the most common practice for medicine, right? For different diseases, you need to know the cause, for example. However, I give it credit, so I give it the benefit of the doubt because it's supposed to be based on the scientific method. So, for example, you want, especially with medicine and you're giving people medications, you want to establish a cause and effect. So they have clinical trials, usually the first of which is to make sure you're not killing people with this stuff. Um,
Yep.
and a lot of the time, we know down to what part of the cell, right? Say the disease is reflected by, hmm, well, I won't say an infection because that's okay, maybe an infection, right? So by a certain bacterium. Uh, and so say, for example, penicillin, right? Those types of antibiotics, we know exactly how they work, exactly how they kill these bacteria, right? So for example, antibiotics, they target part of the bacteria's cellular machinery
Hmm.
that it needs to produce what we call a cell wall. So the
Okay.
cell wall is something that our cells, as humans, we don't have cell walls.
Okay.
Um, but single-celled or microorganisms do have cell walls. They need them to protect them from the environment. And so those types of antibiotics have this functional group, as I mentioned before, right, with the thesis thing.
Yeah.
It's just a specific arrangement of atoms bonded, specific arrangement of atoms of a particular element bonded in a certain, so attached to one another in a certain way, and it's taken in by the bacteria. The cell goes through the cell wall into the bacteria, and it it attaches itself irreversibly to one of the machines, let's call them machines, in the bacterium that actually produces the cell wall. And therefore, without a cell wall, it just explodes. The cell literally lyses, meaning it just breaks open and it dies, right?
Okay.
So there's an understanding there of how of biology. That's like the more you know, the better.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
on the contrary, mild depression in people, right? People, so the medical community used to think, oh, maybe it's neurotransmitters in the brain, right?
Hmm.
That affect our neurons firing, so sending a mild current a certain way, i.e., thinking patterns.
Yep.
Maybe people are low in, say, dopamine, right?
Hmm.
Or serotonin. And so they would treat people with this medication that prevents the cells in the brain, the neurons, from just actively removing these transmitting chemicals. So uh, dopamine, so serotonin, SSRI, SNRI, if that rings a bell,
Hmm.
right?
Okay.
Let's say SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So that means the medication prevents the neuron from taking the serotonin that it releases to make a neuron fire off that little current to another one, so communicate. It prevents that neuron from taking it back into the neuron and just disassembling that molecule. And so
Okay.
therefore there's an increase, right, of these chemicals in the space between neurons, the synapse, right?
Can I ask you something?
Yes.
So how does that like get us back to like the question so we can tie it all together?
Okay. So that we still don't understand. We don't understand. It's not related to dopamine like these inhibitors, but they work. They work. The scientific community does not know exactly how, but and we know it works. We have a vague understanding of how it might work, but it
Hmm.
works, right? So
Okay.
some things in biology we don't know for certain. Some things we know down to the smallest parts of matter. Well, not the smallest parts, but down to the atom, right? So hopefully tying this all together, if we don't know the things that people may have used as medicine in the past, right? If it wasn't recorded, then we don't know, obviously, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, we could have rediscovered things. The things that are known, right? That the things that were recorded, I don't know which ones people would have tested out.
Mm.
But anyone with half a head of brain in their head in the medical community would evaluate something if it showed promise as, say, curing some horrible disease that people had to deal with 4 or 5 thousand years ago, like say the plague,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, hopefully that
No,
answers that
it
question.
does. It does. Because like, you kind of definitely like attack it from different angles. And you kind of, I like the fact that you kind of give like answers more on a like you like to go from very different, like many different perspectives, and not just like one perspective, like your personal or like the scientific communities. You always think of like all these different parts playing together. But thank you for answering that, definitely.
Yeah,
Braden,
that,
you
no
wanna
problem.
good, of course, of course.
Yeah,
And
I just want to add that yeah, that was a very interesting take, Rob. And I think that I guess kind of what Sal is saying is that like things like the Egyptian pyramids and things like that. Are you saying fundamentally we just kind of got to raise our hands and be like, we don't know how these things happen, instead of like hypothesizing something that was never the case to begin with? Like just kind of say, with the evidence that we have now, we're going to say we don't know.
so if there is something like if there is any information at all that hints towards something, the right thing to do would be to start hypotheses. Try to find some questions that you can prove wrong if that is the case. Um, so, for example, I recall people studying the pyramids. There was a chamber, I believe it was the main chamber, and they were studying the acoustics of it, and that showed there was a relationship. All I can say with certainty is that there was a relationship with the acoustics and the inside of the chambers of the Great, I believe it was the Great Pyramids. Uh, and so absolutely people should keep asking questions about that. Um, it I don't think it's taboo, but maybe it is, right? Um, that's more anthropology, but you would have to be you it would be you would have to have different disciplines communicating amongst one another. So you'd have to have probably physicists who understand sound waves, right? Um, to put it, really very lightly, like they understand sound.
Mhm.
And then anthropologists who study the history of cultures. Um, Another interesting thing are those huge ass black tombs, gravestones, whatever they are.
Sarcophagus.
Maybe
Yeah,
the
that's like the where it's like in they said like people say like yeah they put Ark of the Covenant in it or things mystical things like that, or like they say like there's like a lot of different perspectives, like people talking about how they were tombs. Some people think like no, they held treasure. Some people say like it held artifacts, things along these lines. It's like these like giant limestones, like extremely heavy. Is that the ones you're talking about?
the ones the ones I'm talking about, people have described them as being cut so perfectly that they didn't have the tools at that time, or if they did, like which is copper tools, it would have been difficult,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so some people unintentionally, right? I'm not trying to, insult anyone. Some people, because we're not taught how to think critically as a whole in government schools. But anyways, why I say that is because you say, oh, how could they could not have possibly build these? It does not make any sense because they're so fucking heavy for one, and the cuts are so perfect based on people who know about these things. And then you tell that to some person, and they would just, it might go to the default. It's called a straw man argument,
Hmm.
right? And they say, "Oh, you're crazy. You think there were aliens that came down and helped the civilization?"
Yeah.
It's like, "No, that's not what I said. What I said is it's very unlikely that that's how it was done.
Right.
How
Right.
it
Like
was
there's a
done,
yeah. Like
that's
that
that's the question,
exactly.
right?"
Like what like that's the point. Like so. I mean, everything is possible, like you said, like until like we see evidence otherwise. So it's like, who knows, right? Like it's they were cut so good, like and like you know the the limestones were like hundreds of miles away. Like it's not even possible to pull all these like different like extremely heavy structures like together. There's a lot of
Yeah,
different like
that's
theories, right?
nuts.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That is a story.
Yeah, it's okay.
Sorry about that.
It's okay,
But
no
yeah,
worries.
it's wild like how people put these together, made the pyramids there, right? I've talked to people that have taken, did a minor in or did their undergrad in history, and they they get heated, like they get pissed off or annoyed just trying to talk with them, to communicate with them, like generally about similar points that I just talked to you about. And it's
Yeah,
like, for one, why are you getting so emotionally
attached.
revved up,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Well, their
I'm
whole
just
life
trying.
depends on it, you know?
It's their whole worldview.
Yeah.
That's what it's attacking,
Yeah, and
possibly.
Me and Braden, honestly, we love people with your mind because, like we're honestly we're very curious, like like individuals, and we're like honestly entertaining ideas at this point, like where it could be aliens, like hell, like it's just joke, who knows, because at this point,
Yeah,
like it's becoming a meme, like everyone is like coming with like different theories and nobody can prove anything. So.
yeah,
Um, Long story short, though, I would say like let's hop into the next thing. So you know,
sure.
Braden can get his like perspective across.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay, well, we actually got because I posted something on Instagram, Rob. I posted that I was gonna speak to you and speak to a biochemist. So we got a question from Instagram.
Okay.
So this person asks, is it possible to reverse negative epigenetic changes? That's the first question.
Okay.
And then
So,
the second question is, can epigenetic changes be inherited? If so, how many generations can they persist?
okay. So can we reverse negative epigenetic changes? So epigenetics are things, are changes to our genome, so the entirety of our genes, right? After we we have come into existence. So after an egg is fertilized, right, by sperm, the cells divide, right? And they keep dividing. And as you grow older and older in the womb, right, some parts of the genome are turned off, right? Some parts are changed. And so there's a mechanism for that, and it's methylating the DNA where you don't want certain genes expressed. And that's just one mechanism that I'm aware of how the body engages in epigenetics, right? In terms of reversing it, once you have grown and you're a child, and then you're like, you're 5 years old or older, you've already developed a certain way, right? So one negative epigenetic thing that can be intergenerational is your environment growing up. If you grew up in a very unpredictable, very, very anxiety created environment, so say a shitty upbringing, like being screamed at, you weren't able to like have your voice heard, um, you were maybe neglect, right? That definitely can be intergenerational epigenetically. I don't know how, like, to do an experiment like that would be unethical, obviously. So we can't establish causality, right? with humans. So we can't answer that question directly with humans. You would have to treat kids like a piece of shit, and then right?
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
kind of variable. But people have looked at that with rats, for example. They're a common test subject. Uh, I don't know all the reasons, but they're very good for making comparisons to how it might an outcome might unfold with humans. And so they looked at epigenetics and the raising of their young in rats. And so the young that were raised by rats that by the mothers that were neglectful, that didn't spend a lot of time grooming them. Um, their outcomes, right? So epigenetically, they had certain behaviors, right? Like more anxious, um, their health was harmed, right? And they went on to continue to produce offspring like that. So it could have been a learned behavior, right? That just went from generation to generation,
Right.
but it was genetic as well. And so I guess the message there is when it's an argument about nature versus nurture, it's never one or the other, right? There's always some aspect of your environment and there's some aspect of your genetics when we're talking about things like that. For example, homosexuality. There are, if one, say there's a identical twins, right? One of them, say it's two men, one of them is gay. You would think the other one would be gay too, but they're not, right? It's, I believe it's a lot more probable that compared to the general population, which I think is about 2% is the odds. Um, if your genetic twin is gay, right, then your odds are a lot more likely. I think maybe let's just say 50-50, right? So that just goes to show that just because there are genetics and of course because they're identical twins, they were they grew and developed in the womb, right? In the same environment, right? So you would assume the same epigenetics were taking place, right?
Yeah.
Um, so yes, it's not nature versus nurture when it comes to things like that. When it comes to human behavior.
So, is it safe to assume that there is free will in the formula?
Hmm. It depends on how you define free will, and it's hard to define. What I would define it as is a set of internal standards that you set for yourself for desirable behaviors. I would say that's free will. How you choose, how you think you should behave, generally, just to put it in that, just to put it as straightforward as I can think of,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
So your internal standards, they could be wrong. They could be, other people could really disagree,
Yeah.
but you think you're doing the right thing, or you think you're doing something for a good reason because it's part of your internal standards. So I would say, yes, there is free will in that regard. It really depends. Like 99% of disagreements are because people have a different idea in their head of what a certain term refers to. For example, free will,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um,
Everyone has their own like terminology and they project it on other people almost.
yes, so the first thing should be to define, have people reach common grounds on a definition of something.
Yeah.
And then you're on the same page. You can actually have a fruitful conversation, right? A worthwhile conversation.
Yeah.
It's useful.
I love that, by the way. I love the fact that you kind of think in that way. That because yeah, that's definitely important. Like we would I just want to put that out there in the future. We would love to get you on again.
Sure.
Because it's definitely like the way that you think is like is very it's more like very holistic, and you look at problems from like a very well-rounded like place. And yeah, I agree with you. Like it's definitely like there's issues that need to be addressed, and we can't put the ego in there. We can't put the outside like definitions. We have to come to a collective agreement on certain things. You know.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. Okay, Braden. Is that the? Do you want to add anything else? You know.
No, I think that wraps it up for that for those two questions. So my question here was, and this is something that's been on my mind for a while. So Rob, if you can, I think I don't know how you'll approach this, but if evolution is based on survival and reproduction, or survival of the fittest, how do we explain humans creating art, music, philosophy, even sacrificing their lives for abstract ideals? Are these just evolutionary byproducts? If so, what are they? Or is
Okay.
there something deeper biology hasn't accounted for yet?
So survival of the fittest, right? Let's define we need to define the fittest, first of all. It doesn't necessarily mean the strongest, the most virile, the most whatever, right? There are opportunistic, there's species that are opportunistic, that have opportunistic individuals that will say it's a fish species, right? Um, Say the smaller ones, the smaller males, right? The less desirable traits can still make it in there because they're smaller, they can get around the rocks or whatever if the fish, say the fish lives in shallow waters and actually sneak in there, mate with like release their molt or whatever it's called around the eggs of the female. And so they survive. That's why they're still around because that's what they did, right? Um, with people, say, exercising our creativity, right? There is a field called evolutionary psychology, and the way it looks at things is how did that help people survive? I.e., why does that behavior persist? Right? So when it comes to altruism, so sacrificing yourself, right, for a good cause, that relates to pro-social behavior. And so what that is you, as a society, pro-social behavior is behavior that encourages social cohesiveness. So people bonding together more strongly. And what I mean by that is interpersonal relationships, for example, right? And a bit of that could be how we defined free will previously, right? So I think humans evolved um, with a preference for stability, just like a lot of other species. We want a stable environment. We want a stable, predictable environment where we know if we do something, we'll get food, we will have safety, we will have um, a safe habitat, right? And you can see that in everyday lives today. People don't want to live somewhere where there's a lot of crime or violent behavior, right? People don't want to live somewhere where food is scarce or unknown, where if you have one bad winter, you could die, right?
Can
And
I
so,
can I interrupt you for a second?
yep.
Just to say, is it not only about survival, but about thriving as well? Or is that not a part of biology? Like the thrival part, like striving for the best, I guess? Or is that just an evolutionary byproduct? Does that kind of make sense?
So what it sounds like you're asking about ambition.
Yeah, like just these uh, you know, social matters of of Martin Luther King and these very influential people that changed the world. It's not really evolutionary, or maybe it is. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but it doesn't seem that it's an evolutionary byproduct. It seems like it's something deeper, perhaps.
So with evolution, right, there are genetic changes that are more favorable as a whole that take place over time. And that's a very long time. So what we're talking about is within a century's time span. And I think it's best explained by, say, free will, an internal set of standards. Um, for example, I believe when it was Britain, right? That was, from what I know, one of the first cultures to say, you know what, slavery is wrong. And so they would send out their ships at night to go and catch these slave traders' ships. And they would go at night because if they went during the daytime, these people would kill all of the slaves that they kidnapped, if they knew they were going to get caught with them and get in trouble. So we have this internal set of standards, this free will, if we want to define it like that. And people looked around and actually noticed, hey, this is not cool. It's not cool to do this sort of thing. And so their attitudes changed, right? Their opinion towards something. And we have opinions, beliefs, well, beliefs, attitudes, right? Those are those are like core concepts to people and how they define themselves, how they want to be perceived in society. And those can evolve, right? Those can change. Um, and when I say evolve, I'm not referring to like sorry, I'm not referring to genetic evolution, right? I'm referring to um, the a communal mindset, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the reason I bring this up is because I have a religious friend, great person, and he always brings up the argument, well, humans are so far advanced from, chimpanzees or from any other species. We're so far intellectually advanced and socially advanced that there must be a divine creator. There must be someone who created us in his image, you know, because we are so far advanced. Is that a true claim that we are far advanced, or is that just
Well,
uh,
that's relative, right? That's a very subject, sorry, very. That's subjective, right? We're very advanced compared to ants, right? We're very advanced compared to dolphins, right? It's that is a
yeah,
subjective comparison. And so therefore, when you're getting into the metaphysical, right? Metaphysical being things that we can't test. We don't know if there's an afterlife, for example. We can't test it. We can't measure it, right? Um, did something create the universe, right? Because it exists. Well, what is existing, right? Um, we don't know. We can't explain it, right? And so it comes down to what someone wants to believe. Some people claim to be atheists, and therefore they think just there's just nothing. And I think that's incorrect too. How do you know the answer, right? We don't. We don't know the answer. Uh, if it came down to it, I would say it's pretty damn amazing that you have basically self-sentient matter, and matter being just a random, not random, but a collection of atoms from different elements. And these different elements were created from supernova inside stars. So carbon, for example, is an atom, right? It's heavier than hydrogen and helium. And then even heavier atoms like iron, which we need. for our red blood cells, right? So the basic idea here is imagine you make something, say with Legos, right? And certain sides of the Legos only stick to certain parts of other ones. And then there are other ones that stick to another part of other ones that's only between those ones. And just imagine how, as complicated as we want to get. And all of a sudden, you have a bunch of Legos and it's moving around and it's talking and it knows it's made out of Legos. That's, a simple, crude analogy to what we are and what we're doing right now in society. We evaluate our own existence. We ask questions because there is stability in society. We're not outside worrying about food. There's stability. So yeah, metaphysical things, it's hard. And I don't think there is a definite answer, someone could say. Personally, I think that we exist, like something, the universe exists, right? How did it exist? Did something create it? Probably, right? And some people would say, well, that's a paradox because if something created the universe, then what created that thing, and so on. And
Yeah.
all I'd say is, well, it's a paradox. Sure it is, but we're here talking about it. So I guess it's not true. Because if it's a paradox, then it wouldn't happen, right? Like, so if their counter argument is, well, you say there's something that created it, right? And therefore other people were created by other people, et cetera, right? I just say, well, just because it's a paradox, right, doesn't mean that it can't be happening,
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because the universe came from something. What the hell is existence even? Right? So that's all I would say about that to people. Like, you don't know. Who the fuck are you? You don't know shit. We don't know.
Yeah.
It's a blessing and a curse, right? We
Yeah.
don't know what happens after we die with
Yeah.
certainty.
Yeah, there's
And
definitely a lot of just to add on your point, there's a lot of definitely like unexplained things that do happen throughout
yeah,
the world, like and like nobody has explanation for. Who knows, like you said, like it could be like controlled, like yeah, information control, or it could be a million other things, like who knows.
there is one important thing I should bring up. There are very well medically documented cases of people that were essentially dead for a couple of minutes, and they form memories that they couldn't possibly have formed. Um, in my opinion, that's the way it came across to me, right? Uh, and they don't seem too hard to find, right? You just look up near-death experiences, look up the best documented, right?
Yeah.
And it kind of blows your mind a bit, like, wow, like if that really happened, and it's like, well, it's the word of a doctor and like several nurses and what they said,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
And
definitely.
if you take them for their word, it sounds pretty amazing, like pretty cool. Like it could be that there could be something there. And I like to think that if we are this miracle of self-sentient matter, right, it would be a pretty damn cruel thing to once we pass on if that was it. We are just dust in the wind again. All right.
Yeah. Well, that
We
yeah. That like I'm sorry. I want you to
That's
finish
fine.
what you wanted to
Oh,
say.
that's it. That's all. Be
Yeah. So just to kind of like add to the point that you're making is like, yeah, there's like different theories. Some people say like, the whole thing with like, like it's impossible for humans to kind of have this evolution, through time. Some people say like, it's through mushrooms. Some people say like cannabis, all these different like, whole different ideas of like the whole shamans and like spirituality, and there's so many different like angles that people take that, oh, like they kind of come from the place that, that they had things back then that we don't have now, that existed during that time, that was able to kind of like boost the mental cognitive abilities of humans
It
towards like that
changed
evolution.
their consciousness. So it
Yeah,
changed their perception of what of reality, basically.
exactly.
Um,
Yeah, and some
because
people say like the whole alien thing, and I, like you said, I try like to be skeptical as possible, especially with things like that. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, if we don't know it, we don't know it. We can't just really like kind of deny it.
yeah, if yeah, like to have someone, if just say, like, I thought about the alien thing before, and the thing, what makes me curious is if there ever was, right? They would have to have had the technology to travel faster than light, which is insane. We can only think about it.
Mm.
Um, if
Right.
something, if life was that advanced relatively, but
Uh-huh.
actually that is based on physical laws of the universe, like the way things act. So it isn't subjective. If something could create something to surpass that, right? Um, it would be it would make me wonder why waste your time going to another planet just to hide yourself, right? When people are thinking about these things, why waste your time coming here? What, like, don't you have anything else better to do? But that's just me, my conjecture, right?
Yeah, no, of course.
And
Well, that's the
yeah.
whole point of like us having this conversation. Like it's like coming to an understanding, because sometimes like, you know, um throughout time we always see like, uh information control, right? Like, and then like people being pushed down, so someone can have an edge, whatever, some people like, in positions, high positions, like things like that. I prefer, like, just kind of, just brush on it, like, and not go
Hmm.
too deep with that stuff. But yeah, you know what I mean. So I
When
think
it
like,
comes to controlling information, generally I say follow the money,
mhm,
right?
yeah,
Um, people are were people have were capable of becoming literally addicted to power, right?
yeah,
And so therefore you have certain governments that consolidate a lot more power in certain positions than other ones do,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And so the more powerful a position, the more addictive and lucrative it is. And the things you have to do to get there might not make you the best person in the world in terms of like your personality traits, like lying, etc. Right?
yeah,
Um, and with like these gatekeepers of information, right?
yeah,
That well, why, if there is information, right, and it's kept from us, which there has been in the past, right?
mhm,
For example, the War of Vietnam,
yeah.
right?
We were
There was
winning, but we weren't.
that, but there was a false flag that was used to justify the US going to war with Vietnam because of the boogeyman of
Yeah,
communism, right?
yeah,
And just leaving communism aside, I'm not talking about communism, but that was the justification. So the US purposely lied and covered it up, and this was released like however many, like 6 decades later, after the people who made those decisions are well long gone and dead, right?
exactly. Yeah, no
There's
accountability. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and currently there is no accountability either. If a
yeah,
politician, if a certain political party in Canada makes a decision and end up costing like billions of dollars that people will have to pay the tax and more in taxes, right?
Yeah.
None of it comes out of their pocket. If it did, right, then I think things would be run a little bit differently in terms of just government control, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So if there are any gatekeepers of information, it is institutions with the ability to use force against people justifiably because they are given authority to use force against people. Those are the ones that can hold information and hide
Definitely.
it from people,
Definitely.
right?
I'll
Yeah,
definitely want to
yeah.
expand on that, but I would say like let's move on.
Sure.
I would because definitely like yeah, I do relate with your where you're coming from because definitely like it does have some level of understanding that it's a collective consciousness thing. Like once we get on the same page, then that's not gonna happen. But when we're all like divided and attacking each other for no reason, like that's how
Yeah.
power is being exploited against the people instead of
Yep.
like
There's a big turn on emotion button on people's heads, and we're primed for it by the media, right? Over really divisive issues.
yeah.
And that's how we're divided,
I
basically.
I believe we're coming along though, especially like with like the world like starting to be more and more crazy with like the authoritarian I think you know what I mean.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Author
Authoritarian,
there you go.
authoritarian. Yeah. No,
There you go.
I understand you. Yeah.
Yeah, so as they push more and more for control, like as they're doing now with like especially AI and like trying to, kind of numb people down and things like that, like more and more people are coming and being more vocal about like world issues like throughout the world, from wars to conflicts to censorship,
Yeah,
to
it's nuts. It's
yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, to even
Um,
like the whole red pill thing, like and like understanding like the narrative throughout like the world.
I would love to talk about this for hours, but we got to get back on track here.
yeah.
Um, okay, let's Sal, you want to say your second question?
Yeah, absolutely. So for the second question that I had, it was sorry, give me a second. So yeah, so it was what are like controversial topics in biology?
Right now is, I would say, stem cell research is probably still controversial. Um, People that have, so in the scientific community, there have been leaps and strides, I guess, to use a tacky cliche in terms of getting access to stem cells, so you don't have to harvest it from underdeveloped new people or whatnot. They're called pluripotent, sorry, stem cells. And so they're cells from a person that are taken with their permission, and they are treated with various chemicals to induce those cells to no longer be differentiated. And what I mean by differentiated is behave like a specific kind of tissue. In this case, typically it's adipose tissue, fat. They take those cells and they treat them with various chemicals, and they become stem cells again, which means that which means that they can be essentially any tissue you want them to be, as long as you follow the right procedure or procedures, right, to induce them into becoming that kind of tissue. So I'd say maybe stem cells. I am not aware of any other like any really divisive, contentious debates going on that make their way to just everyday society.
Uh-huh.
There, lots of people have different beliefs,
Perspectives.
you could
Yeah, yeah.
say,
Yeah, yeah.
about certain things,
Uh-huh.
about certain findings.
Yeah. But
But
so far that's what you've seen.
yeah,
Okay. Yep.
Perfect. All right, this is my final question. Um, and I guess I'll just make this like a two-part question, if you will. Is if consciousness emerges from biology and biology is shaped by evolution, then doesn't that make consciousness itself an evolutionary adaptation? But if so, what was it selected for? And does that imply reality is best navigated through experience, not just measurement?
Okay, so what you're saying is because biology resulted in us being organisms, and as organisms, we have what we call consciousness. Therefore, could you repeat the last part? Sorry.
Yeah, it's just basically what I'm saying is if consciousness
A
is
byproduct?
selected like a byproduct of evolution
Okay.
and selected for by evolution, then what was it selected for? Like, what was the evolutionary advantage of consciousness? And why, and another interesting thing is like, why don't AI systems, like, why can't we repeat that in a lab where for, robotic systems or for AI systems, because we can't get them to be conscious, but we can be conscious ourselves? So is that kind of a gift that we have in some
So,
sense?
so consciousness, that's another one of those terms that people there needs to be a discussion of how you would define it. And I'm not saying a long one, right? So let's say consciousness being we are self-aware. I believe that's what you're hinting at,
Yeah, exactly.
right? Okay.
Yeah.
So we're self-aware. How would that have evolved as some sort of selective trait? I would say being aware and more in control of our own processes, our own psychological processes, our own behavior to change it would have given people an a, an adaptive edge, right? To be more in control of our environment and ourselves.
And then why can't we replicate that in
Oh, sorry.
AI, for example?
Yeah. So we can't replicate it in AI because we have to tell AI in computer language, ones and zeros, exactly how to act, right? Um,
Um,
there
Rob,
are these, yep.
so I just want to say the meeting, it's saying obviously that if it disconnects, it shouldn't disconnect, but because I put the time limit to 32, like 11:32, it might disconnect. We're not familiar with the new update that they have.
Okay.
If it disconnects, I'll send you a link right away.
Yep. Sounds good.
Okay.
So AI, artificial intelligence, we write these scripts, we write a computer language to tell it to say, in this context, do these things, right? Gather all of these terms and decide this is what they mean. Here are the rules for grammar. Um, here are the rules for communicating. Like this is how what your answer how it should be formatted. So we tell it what to do in terms of it being conscious, so self-aware. That's a phenomenon that we don't even understand yet fully ourselves. Some of it has to do with attention, right? Attention is a very limited resource. We are terrible at multitasking as humans. Uh, Attention is related to a certain area in our brain, the temporal lobes, right? One
Right,
of
right.
one of them is good for attention. Um, One of them's better for attention than the other one, and I can't remember which. But the important thing is it is a byproduct that we are not fully aware of. We attribute it to the folds of our brain, how they fold. So the gyruses. right?
Right.
There's the grooves and then there's the lumpy parts, right? And so that makes a surface area that's a lot larger than it would be if it wasn't all coiled together. It would be huge. It wouldn't fit in our head, right? And so that's
Right.
what people attribute it to. We do know certain parts of the brain that are responsible for certain informational processing, and it's a bottom-up thing. So information we get comes, for example, eyesight. It comes through we get it through our eyes, hits our retina, travels through the optical nerve into the back of our head, the occipital lobe, and then the information is processed, right? So it comes from the raw data, and then it goes up to different shapes, right? Different perspectives, so depth perception, um, etc. And that is combined with things that we hear, right? A lot of these processes are automatic. We're not even aware it's happening. It happens for us automatically, right? So even those things, we aren't fully self-aware of a lot of the things going on in our brain. We are, however, self-aware of our existence and other things that we can actually think about using our imagination. Um, so, in terms of writing a computer, making artificial intelligence um, such that it's self-aware would be difficult considering we don't fully understand it yet.
Yeah.
Hopefully, that touches
Yeah, that
upon that answers
yeah,
it.
that definitely makes sense. All right, we got two more questions left, and
All right.
then we can wrap it up.
So I actually have my last question. So it's probably one.
All right.
Um, so my final question, I would say, for me, it was, how do you think we came to be? Your personal opinion, obviously. Like, I understand you don't represent the college you work at, or you represent anyone but yourself. You know, So what are your personal opinion about, And that's me, us, like guys talking to each other, more like a chat. What do you think?
I think that considering like present day now, like just how cruel life is, right? Totally being objective here. Like little kids die, right? Like from natural sources, or of say disease, for example. Life is very unpredictable. And so we see the mechanisms of adaptiveness, right? We can see these selective pressures even today, modern day, like changing environments, for example. Um, and so I would have to say that I do think that we did we did evolve, right? From we have common ancestors with other, say, primates. That at least that's what carbon dating, so that's the physical sciences, anthropologists, right? Or people who excavate these bones. Um, that's where it seems, that's the direction that it seems to have gone, and it seems pretty well documented. And so if I were to say anything, I'd say that's likely, that seems to make the most sense based on what information we have available, right? If
Okay.
we get new information, obviously, the important thing is to actually consider that. Don't let your emotions get in the way. If new information came around, right? Don't don't delude yourself. That's the main thing. A lot of people are afraid of change or afraid of X, Y, Z. And so therefore they lash out in infantile behavior like ad hominem attacks, like you're crazy or this and that, when instead they should be looking inside themselves and being like, why am I afraid that this might be true? Right? Uh,
Yeah.
so anyways, that's the direction that I I I feel that it went, and that's
Mhm.
what we are.
Yep.
Uh, I think language is really important. Being able to speak and listen and understand each other, that's really important for us to how we're able to do what we do and how our brains are developed, relatively compared to other organisms out there.
Yeah.
Um, I know dolphins speak to each other, like do they use echolocation or whatnot?
Yeah,
Um,
they have their own like wavelengths of communication, yeah.
yeah, like they have their own language, I believe.
Yeah.
Uh, I haven't looked into that in a while.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's the direction that we went. And if I'm gonna trust a science that can, that's based on fundamental laws of the universe of physics that can fling satellites around the moons or around whatever planets, slingshot around them, and then go take pictures of Uranus, right? Not your anus, but Uranus.
Yeah.
Sorry. Then I have to give it credit to like the same method producing, these sets of data and the common conclusion leading to, well, we're here because of this, basically. And so that's where I would stand with that.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So, do you think that we evolved from a common ape ancestor?
Mm, the
Or is
thing
the
with
evidence on that not great?
so as far as I understand, there were Neanderthals, right? I don't remember the exact terminology, right? There is evidence of like human Homo sapiens, right? Mating, where you have timeline going up, where you have populations, you know, combining again, then diverging from one another, then combining. So when I say populations, I mean like, something very similar to us versus something that's like a step away from our common ancestor, right? And so there's evidence for that. Um, so I would say, hmm, I'm not sure. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, that works. That works. I have one
Okay,
more question here.
sure.
This is not really, I mean, you're a chemist as well, so I think you might appreciate this question. And we talked about it before with the whole God who created God, that sort of infinite regress type of loop. But I said the question is, isn't it a contradiction to say that matter was created in the Big Bang and matter cannot be created nor destroyed? Is there something I'm missing?
Okay, so they're talking about one of the laws of thermodynamics, right? Which was recently changed because matter can be destroyed, right?
Mhm.
It's in Einstein's theory, Einstein's equation E equals mc squared. The c squared is just the speed of light. It's just there as a unit converter, right? So mass is proportional with energy, right? Um, we
Is
can
that
combine,
is it the equivalent of energy?
it's proportional to,
Okay, can I
Proportional. Okay.
right?
guys, I want to ask. So, Rob, before you finish your point, so the people that are watching this understand. So, what was the previous definition, and what's the current definition?
Matter can't be created or destroyed.
And what's the current one?
I believe it's energy can't be created out of nothing or destroyed.
Okay.
I just know that it's not matter anymore because, of course, you can destroy matter. You can have um, a proton and its antiproton, its antimatter equivalent. And once they come into contact with each other, because matter behaves as waves, right? When the smaller we get, because that's quantum chemistry, it's quantized, they self-annihilate and they release a lot of energy, hence referring back to the energy being proportional to mass. So back and forth, right? So in that system as in like we're only looking at, you know, only those two things, right? The proton and the antimatter equivalent combining, right? You're losing mass and you're gaining energy.
Okay, okay, that's it. We don't have to dive too much deeper, but like Braden, going back to your question, so we kind of I don't steal away like obviously like the time, like since you were speaking about the your question. So could you kind of make sure you kind of rewind back to what was your question again?
Yeah, so just to give like a visual diagram here, I don't know if this is the right way to visualize it, but you have the Big Bang here, right? And then you have something here, but apparently there was nothing here. At least that's kind of the narrative. So how did that like religious people will drill people like me and people that bring that argument up all the time because it's like how can you have the Big Bang this and then before the Big Bang there was nothing and then you have the whole universe now comes to be.
Okay. Um, so we don't understand what happened like a small fraction right after the Big Bang. All the time before that, we don't know. We can't predict. The models, current models don't work of what the hell happened, right? All we know is that from a certain point onwards, the mass and energy in the universe, right, is finite and was finite, meaning there was only a certain amount, and there still is, right? And it's been constant even as the universe expanded from there, and how stars formed, how galaxies were created, how black holes began, right? That's all explainable. That's all very, and we're learning more and more now with, say, the James Webb telescope, right? Um, it's, for example, visualizing the first event horizon of a black hole. Well, Einstein's theories of relativity, right? That space time, right? Um, they're interrelated. Uh, that is what space is and how it behaves, and it explains gravity as you have these dips. Something with the more mass something has, the more it curves space-time. And so an object going would fall down into this little funnel, right? And be caught in it. Um, so sorry. Am
So
I going on a
the
tangent
kind
here?
of the kind of layman's answer to that is we just don't know. We don't have a predict like we know what happened shortly after the Big Bang, but we don't
We
know what happened.
we don't know
Uh,
how it
we
happened.
don't even know if before even makes any sense.
We don't know
Like if
what
before is
happened.
even logical.
Yeah, we can only speculate. We don't know where did all this mass come from? Why did it explode? Right? Was there space? Like, was there actual space, what we consider space as it behaves now, as we understand it, before the Big Bang? Right? Um, because to me it seems like it was the opposite of why didn't it form a big black hole? Right? All that mass concentrated, why didn't it just curve the shit out of space-time and just have a huge ass black hole? Um,
Would that be more probable?
well, you would think it would be, but obviously that's not what happened, right? So it's probably because it
Yeah.
was all of it was relatively constant, the density, right? The amount of matter per certain volume of space. That's probably why it just didn't collapse into a black hole. It's just it's there are a lot of possibilities, I guess. It sounds more like a white hole, which behaves the opposite of a black hole. So for some reason, the matter repels itself,
Mm,
right? And instead of reaching a point where you can go into a black hole so far that past the event horizon, you're stuck, right?
yeah.
So
Uh-huh.
flip that for a white hole because mass repels itself,
Uh-huh.
right?
What's a white
Um,
hole again?
It's the direct opposite of a black hole.
So what
It's
would be
it's
that defined as?
so a black hole is defined as mass that a relatively large quantity of mass that is so large that it curves space-time a lot to the point where even even light can't escape, right? So light traveling across space-time, and there's this big dip, right? And it goes into the dip and it goes all the way down, right? This curve in space-time. So
Uh-huh.
a white hole would be the opposite of that. It wouldn't be a dip,
Mm.
right? It wouldn't be mass accumulating and getting more and more dense, right?
Okay.
And
Yeah, yeah.
creating a dip in space-time. It would be the opposite. It would be mass wanting to be repelled by itself and just exploding in all directions.
Yeah.
Um, so that's how I understand it, at least. Like I'm not some particle physicist, but it's
Yeah. No,
that's
it's
a white
okay.
hole. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, so essentially like it connects to a part of the universe and it projects it out.
Yeah. So black holes were predicted before we even knew they existed, right? By relativity, right? The special relativity, general relativity, like that era of time. Um, there are uh, Lewinsky space, Maxwell equations, things like that.
Uh-huh.
And some of it can exist, right? Some of the things that they predicted might not exist just because they can't, based on how reality is, how the laws of physics are.
Yeah.
So a white hole might not necessarily be able to exist in reality the way it actually is objectively.
Yeah, so
Um,
it could be an anomaly then. Because if it's projecting, right? Like where's it projecting from, right? Like
yeah, exactly. And some
like
people guess like, are we is where we are like is our universe like inside a big black hole? Is that what happened? You
mm,
know? Um,
yeah.
but
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
people conjecture. No one really knows. A lot of
I love
people
that.
make
Yeah.
money because they just turn it into clickbait on people's feeds to read it, and then you read through it and you realize you've wasted your time. I'm speaking from experience here,
Uh-huh.
because it just goes. You get to the same answer at the very end. We don't know. Don't know.
Do you are you familiar with the many worlds interpretation?
Yes,
Can you explain
multi.
that to me? Because I never got that.
Okay, so this is this is based on choices, right? On actions, right? So the way things are, say, we can choose to do something, um, action A or action B. We can choose one or the other, right? Um, us choosing action B and A both exist, right? And some people call it, parallel universes or different realities that we can't observe ourselves, right? We can only observe the parts of this reality that we create through our choices. Um, any other naming system for that nomenclature or whatnot, I don't know what the common terms are, but you could,
Multiverse usually.
yeah,
Rob.
multiverse.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So that from what I understand, that's basically it. That's how it functions.
But how can you have so there's a choice. So like I have the choice to raise my hand right now or a choice to which I just did, are you saying that in another universe there's Brayden who didn't raise his hand?
According to that theory, right? And as I mentioned
But
before,
what's the evidence for it? Like what's the
there isn't any. There
Oh,
isn't
okay.
any. You
Okay,
can't,
that makes
yeah,
a lot more sense then.
that's the
Okay.
that's the gist of how it works, the theory, but it
Yeah.
has no robust experimental results to prop it up.
Yeah. You know, Rob, like a lot of people they were saying like, they see like they remember things different, like, and that's how they kind of come from to the conclusion of like, oh, like that must be there must be change in the past or something along the lines of like timeline, like deja vu kind of thing, where they assume that because this deja vu happened and you saw something that you feel like 100% you saw before in your dream, or I don't know, waking up, like kind of, it just hits you different. Like they assume like, oh, like that's like synchronicities kind of thing, or they think like in some ways like some people say call like the Flintstones compared to the Flintstones, like the whole like people remember things different with the whole like like the so many different like aspects of the details, um
Yeah.
But all
there's
those claims aren't falsifiable, right? They're not like if you have deja vu and then you're like, well, this is from me from, this is Braden in Earth 2, then
We
that
have
doesn't
a
really do much. Like you can't like what are you going to do with that information, you know?
so we have a lot more verifiable data to explain things like that, that don't come to that conclusion, right? Uh, than we do for evidence that supports it. Maybe it's possible, right? That is the case, right? Somehow something is affecting matter in this reality. It's affecting the part of our brain that creates memories, long-term memories, right? And how would you test that?
yeah.
It's versus we do have memories. Sometimes we make false memories, right? And sometimes we let our feelings sway our decisions, right? And some things we can take alter our state of consciousness. We know these things. And the problem is people can easily dismiss it,
Mm,
right? And say that's bullshit, which
mm, yeah.
it there's a strong possibility that it is bullshit. And on the other hand, it's not that's not that's not a good reason to just totally dismiss it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But just say you talk to somebody and they're like, "Yeah, I was on acid and I remembered something that I never remembered ago." It would make it would raise some eyebrows, basically, right?
Well,
But
what do you
why?
think? What do you think, Rob? Like when it's a collective, like remembrance of a specific event, like Bernstein. Like right now, people think as Bernstein. Like the whole thing what I told you with like the you know like Flintstones and like there's certain things that are like people collectively remember as like a specific thing, and then like they don't see it anymore. Like even through like what's let's say like another controversial thing where like it was like what is the name of this like monkey show that was like very it's like Joe the Monkey or something like that. Um it's like you guys know that one. It's like I gotta look it up again. But
That's
it
cool.
is
That's cool.
yeah, so I'm looking it up right now, but like it is a show that was well known and everybody remembers like the monkey having a tail and like doesn't have a tail anymore. So it's like there's certain things where people feel like okay, like something is off, is either like I'm going insane, but then like they kind of collectively think like no, like it had a tail, like I'm not crazy. And is that like more of a cognitive issue that because the brain misinterprets certain signs. And is that possible to be collective as a collective group remembering these things? Is that possible?
Um, so is it possible to have a collectively shared memory?
Experience, memory, yes, yeah.
Okay. I would have to ask, what is a collectively shared experience? Because that's something I don't get. I've never experienced it.
Hmm.
I don't really quite understand it. Like it sounds like you're saying people, no matter where you are or who you're with, experience the exact same thing at the exact same time, and it created the exact same memory. Is that
Yeah,
true?
it's yeah, exactly. Like that, like whether it is like we can argue this, right? Like we don't have to go in depth in it. We could, have another podcast talking about different things later on in the future. And but it's mainly like that concept of you know, feeling like because like also there's unexplainable things with mothers and their children, sisters and their twins, things like that, where it's like the bond is like very strong and you can tell like, oh, something is there, like the same thing with you said, like with the afterlife thing. People are dead for a few minutes, some people even dead for an hour. Like I heard like very bizarre stories, but I don't know how credible they are. Like, and they come back, like it's not possible, like physically is not possible, like unless like
Yeah.
we could always argue that like some people might call that like residual electricity in the body or something along these lines, or there's a million reasons like why things happen, so I'm just kind of bringing up these topics because I know when people are listening to you, in the back of their mind they're always asking these like very bizarre questions and very unique questions that they always were told that they were crazy for asking these questions.
Yeah. But if someone tells somebody they're crazy for asking a certain question, they just don't have a good answer, right? Um, my opinion, based on what we know, right, there would have to be something else affecting us, affecting our minds, affecting the way that our brain creates memories, right? Something else affecting that in, aside from or in combination with what we are perceiving. So what we are seeing and hearing. So something else actually creating memories, which memories are a combination of things all put together, all of our senses, right? Including our internal thoughts or monologues or whatnot. So there would have to be some other process going on instead of just what we perceive, including, our feelings, things from within. And I am not aware of something like that. Uh, it would, you would need to be able to test something like that,
Yeah.
but that would be difficult, right?
Yeah, based on our current
Because
models
because
of
you can't control it.
yeah,
If you don't know what the independent variable is, right? You can't even control it. Um,
makes sense. Oh, I actually
Hopefully that.
looked it up and it said Curious George. That was the name.
Oh,
That
Curious George.
yeah, so a lot of people were like, like, this thing, whatever, but that's more of like a question that, is like more of just that popped up. And I hope like, it's not like too much like out there, I don't want to kind of make you
There,
feel like, that it's kind of pushing the boundaries or something.
no, that's fine. Um, so there are certain behaviors that, as a whole, not everybody, of course, never define a person based on group averages, obviously, right? Um, there are a lot of biases to processing information that humans are capable of, right? There's the self-confirmation bias, right? We think we think we know something works a certain way, and so we only look for things happening a certain way to confirm our belief in that when it could have just been coincidental, for example. And then there are other biases where someone wants to believe in something, right? And then say they ask their friends, and they're like, oh, yeah, right? And then you just have this momentum going, social momentum, where you have like a chat board or whatnot saying, what the hell's going on here? Like, we remember this, but it's not true, right?
Yep. Yep.
So you would have to know a lot more about the context of when it started and how it progressed. You have to know a lot more to actually give it a fair evaluation, I think.
Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. Okay. Well, that's like the last question. I would say, Braden, do you have any final thoughts? This conversation was super cool. I just want to put that out there, Rob. Like, I really enjoyed this conversation. Like,
Me too.
uh, it, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah, it definitely like it is hard to find like people to have a interesting questions with, especially because the more complex questions you have, the less people that can answer them usually. You know.
Yeah,
So
yeah. When it comes to say say there's disagreements in say the origins of the universe, right? Or possibly aliens, for example. Yes, they might be valid questions to ask. Um, in terms of priority, right? If we're talking about these things as you think of their usefulness for society, right? Uh, there are, and I'm not saying we shouldn't pursue them. It's just like we should. It's worthwhile to take a little inventory of what do we want to prioritize, how we spend our limited amount of time and energy on, right? Um, And some of that is, right, internal standards, call it morals, right? And the way we treat other people, right? Like one of my huge, one big thing is we have a society where we give a small minority of people a monopoly over the use of force. So threatening people with physical and or mental harm if they don't follow the rules, right? Coercion. That's how governments work. Coercion is threatening someone with whatever harm if they don't behave a certain way. It's literally the definition of coercion. Yet that's how we provide people stability, right? In societies today. And meanwhile, if somebody else who did the exact same thing, no matter the reasons, right, they would be looked upon as a piece of shit and thrown in jail, right? So one big question I wonder is what's with this huge double standard, right? How can people just walk around and there's this huge double standard and it's like things have to go this way, especially with divisive issues, right? And no wonder it's so divisive because you have the coercion backing it. Just say abortions were made illegal, right? That's serious because you could get thrown in jail, right? You could get thrown in jail, you can this and that. So that coercion creates a lot of discord in society. And that's one thing that I have a huge beef with. Uh, it's a double standard, and I don't think it's moral at all. I think it's like something Neanderthalic or something that people just have to outgrow.
yeah.
You have to out, you have to learn how to be an adult and outgrow relying on strangers with guns, basically, or weapons, right?
Yeah.
To solve problems you have with other people, right?
Yeah.
I'm not talking about victims of violence like by other people. I'm just talking about things like property ownership stuff, right? The
Yeah.
more people can realize that, you know, be in control of your emotions, have an actual good discussion with somebody else and come to, compromise, the less we would have to rely on things like that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree. Do you have any final thoughts, Rob, before we head out? And
Robert,
what
What was that?
I think,
do?
did you say Bob?
No, Rob.
Is that, oh, Rob. Okay, sorry.
You can
Uh,
call
Uh,
me anything you want.
uh, well, so Rob, be like, whatever. I mean, I'm cool with whatever nickname you like.
Okay. There's a
He's
with
joking.
that. Yeah.
But so going back to you, is that where if people want to get taught by you or support you in any way, is there anything that you want to put for people to help you or anything like that?
I would
yeah,
say,
just give him his, if you want to shout out your email, maybe,
yeah, sure.
if they have any direct questions.
Yeah. It's my first name, Robert, Robert, period. My last name, Paugh. So Paugh, another period, 01 at gmail.com.
Okay.
So,
And is there anything else you would like to add? Anything that you think that will help you in any way in case people watch this?
we talked a lot about a lot of things. So I would
Okay.
just say, just consider, don't be afraid of new ideas. Consider, some things that, people have talked about. Um, that are, that provide value, the most value, right? So, for example, how we treat others and how we keep society stable, that affects everybody versus discussions about, and I'm not saying it's not important, but discussions about the origins of the universe or life, right? It's cool to, it's fine to have disagreements with that sort of thing. On the other hand, it's important right now that people like, there's a lot of shit happening in the world that is terrible and a lot I'm probably not even aware of, I can't speak to. Uh, and it probably arises from a lot of things that we fall victim to, which is, those straw man arguments where we just get our feelings cloud our judgment. Um, Preventing us from being able to get along, basically. And I would just consider what some things, both sides of the argument, um, of what provides the most value to you. That's all.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I mean,
You're
this
welcome.
is Rob's message to the universe, everybody. There you go.
Yeah.
The documentary is coming soon. So,
It's called Mr. Faggot. No, I'm just kidding. It's not called Mr. Faggot.
You're hilarious. You're hilarious,
Okay,
Rob.
I gotta stop that. Sometimes I beat a dead horse with my
No, no, you're good.
sense
You're
of
good.
humor.
We're just dudes having a good time. It's okay.
Okay.
Well, Rob, I'll tell you what. We definitely in the future will be in contact with you to see, like, eventually we'll get you back in and we have another convo. Maybe a few months from now, or it just depends.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
really happy to have you in this. Obviously, like if you want the link, we'll send you the link also, like on an email.
Sure.
So you could have a laugh. Why not?
Yeah, I rarely get to actually literally hear my own voice, like pre-recorded, you know what I mean? Like you hear your voice tape on tape, it's like I sound like that. Like
Yeah. Well,
one
that's
of
this.
those things.
I think that's like everybody on some level, because I feel the same way. I don't know if it's relatable to Braden or like other people. I don't. Is that related to you, Braden, at all? Like you feel that way?
Not really, no, not really.
He's
I
like,
wouldn't even trust Braid and he can't even decide on a haircut. So
uh, he's like, I'm born a superstar. Okay.
he's like in the mirror with the head trimmer. You're a whore. Biology.
He's like, no haircut today. Nothing.
I'm just kidding, Braden.
I know, I know.
You guys are awesome, man. You guys are awesome. Well, guys, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you too. Thanks for
Thank you.
having me.
Yes, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Of course, of course. You've
I
been
enjoyed it.
awesome. You've been awesome, seriously. And like really informative. Thank you guys for watching this episode. This is our first official episode on the channel with with Robert Paugh.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yes, sir.
Sal. Thank you, Drayden.
Yes, sir. Well,
You
see
guys, it's been the Critical Minds podcast. Take care. Bye.
Later.